2 years ago, on the 11th of November 2018, I was privileged to preach in Hexham Abbey on the occasion of the Northumberland Civic Service of Remembrance for the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. None of us could have imagined 2 years ago the circumstances in which we would now be making our remembrance this year. We're in our second period of lockdown in the grip of a pandemic that is sweeping through the country and indeed is sweeping through many countries throughout the world. This year, 2020, marks two more 100-year anniversaries. It was on the 11th of November 1920 that the cenotaph in Whitehall, designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, was unveiled, and the body of an unknown soldier, sailor or airman, brought home from France to be buried in Westminster Abbey, to symbolise all those who had died for their country but whose place of death was not known. Of those who died in action in that First World War, as many as 1/3 of them had no known grave. The original idea of having a grave, a tomb for the unknown warrior, is thought to have originated with an army padre, Reverend David Railton, who served in France himself. He later became a vicar in Margate in Kent. He wrote to the Dean of Westminster, Herbert Ryle, with the idea, and Herbert Ryle thought, what a good idea, and he talked to the King about it. The King was not originally at all impressed, but Herbert Ryle, the Dean, was not about to give up, and he wrote to the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, Lloyd George, who talked the King round, and Lord Curzon was appointed to chair a committee to oversee the permanent cenotaph, memorial and the grave of the unknown warrior. There are a number of different versions as to how the body of the unknown warrior was selected, but it's generally agreed that one body, identifiable only as a British soldier, sailor or airman, was exhumed from each of 4 main battle areas in France on the night of the 7th of November 1920 and brought to a chapel in Saint-Paul in northern France. Each body was covered with a Union Jack and placed on a stretcher. The officer in charge, Brigadier General L.J. Wyatt, picked out one of the 4, and this was placed in a coffin. The remaining bodies were reburied in the military cemetery at Saint-Paul. The body that had been chosen was placed in a coffin of English oak, and a cortege a mile long accompanied it to Boulogne, where it was taken on board the destroyer Verdun for the crossing to Dover. On that morning of the 11th of November 1920, 100 years ago, the unknown warrior was drawn in a procession to the cenotaph in London on a gun carriage drawn by 6 black horses. Many of the people who lined the streets to watch the cortege pass have been waiting all night. At exactly 11 o'clock, King George V released the flags that had been veiling the monument, and as the chimes of Big Ben died away, everyone fell silent for 2 minutes, and the last post sounded. The body of the unknown warrior was then taken on its way, followed by the King and all the ministers of state, to Westminster Abbey. It was borne to the west end of the nave through a guard of honour of 100 holders of the Victoria Cross, and here the burial service was held. I'm not sure why the organisers were so taken by surprise, but they were taken by surprise by the response of people to the ceremony. At least 40,000 people passed through the Abbey before the doors were closed that night. And in that week, the pilgrimage past the cenotaph and the grave of the unknown warrior went on throughout the week. And up until the time the tomb was closed on the 18th of November, an estimated 1.25 million people visited the cenotaph and the Abbey. And the site is to this day one of the most visited war graves in the world. This year it's important as important as ever that we do our remembering. When we remember as a nation, when we remember our history, we preserve the very soul of our nation, our sense of who we are as a people with shared history, some of which has involved enormous expressions of courage and sacrifice of life. When we remember and we reclaim for ourselves the values that are precious, values that need defending. And we remember to whom we especially owe profound gratitude for sacrifices made. This is true of those who were in the First and Second World Wars and other conflicts since. And it's true too for all that's happening in our country and our world today. I would like to end this reflection with just two expressions I hope you might find an inspiration and an encouragement from the grave of the unknown warrior and the cenotaph. When we see a war grave, the headstone on a war grave for someone whose name is not known, we know at the bottom is inscribed "known unto God." And the tomb of the unknown warrior represents those unknown to us, but surely known to God. And that remarkable promise is for all of us. In our lives and in our death, we, each one of us, are utterly and deeply and profoundly known to God, valued by God. And then there is the cenotaph. The cenotaph word literally comes from the Greek, which means empty tomb, and it means an erection that it memorialises the dead, but in fact where nobody is buried. But I think for many of us, and certainly for me in my Christian faith, the empty tomb reminds us powerfully of that empty tomb on Easter morning, when above all we were assured of the victory of life over death, of love over hatred. Life and love win. God bless you.